Welcome everybody to the periodic table of history. Today we're going to talk about the origin and the expansion of writing itself. It's been a question that I always have had, so I decided to do a deep dive on it. So what we're going to do is explore the Middle East, then Asia, then Africa, then Europe, and look at the whole world and how writing has spread out. So let's zoom in here to our primary area where writing is significant. I'm going to refer to the time period of about 3000 BC to 2200 BC as the flood era. There are 400 different flood stories, and all of them put the flood into that period of time. And so you can see here I have the Sumerian Kish tablet as what is considered the oldest writing. I'm going to zoom in there just a little bit more. This is the same area talked about in the Hebrew record, talking of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives getting off from the ark, and then going eastward, and then swirling over here to this Fertile Crescent area. So Kish is a city in this area. So from the oldest tablet that we have some arrows pointing out to two other very pronounced areas. And they are the areas where the Elamites settled and the area where the Egyptians settled. So I'll put all of those on here. Zoom out one little segment and we can see the Elamite tablet and the plaque of Menes on here. If I were to put the descendants of Shem on here, then we have Elam as one of the descendants of Shem. He's over here as the firstborn of Shem. Another one of the descendants of Shem that is good to note is this Aram, the fifth son of Shem, because that is where Aramaic comes from. And these are also considered Shemitic languages. So now the tablets, the cuneiform and the hieroglyphs that are mainly pictorial, they start to develop just a little bit more, and we get the earliest authors, and both of them come out at about the same time. So we have Ptahhotep over in Egypt about 2300 BC, and then we also have Enheduanna of Ur, also 2300 BC, so they're probably tied. Interesting to note is Enheduanna is a female writer. And both of these authors started categorizing the pictures so that they made a story. They comprised a story. So that's where we first see the authorship. It's somewhere around 2300 BC. And one of the stories is called Enmakar and the Lord of Aratta, 2100 BC. This is an interesting one because it recaps the Tower of Babel story. So the Tower of Babel is approximately right here. This is one of the possible locations just right here by the Persian Gulf. I'll click on it a little bit so some indicators will pop up. So if you're interested in the Sumerian take on that, you get a hold of that Enmakar and the Lord of Aratta and see how it compares to the story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis. So we get a third player on the world stage. Not just Sumeria and not just Egypt, but now we have the island of Crete. At 2100 BC, we have this third set of hieroglyphs. And I can't help but thinking about what must be in the Mediterranean, because we know the levels have risen and fallen, and therefore there's a lot of archaeological discoveries that could be in this area, but keep in mind that is over 4,000 years ago. The fourth player early on is this Indus Valley script. We see this type of pictograph on some of the temples over in the Indus Valley in India. So when we are looking for the oldest type of writing, which isn't alphabetic but is pictographic, then this is the area that we have to look. And I find that really interesting in the context of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And remember, at one time they got out of the ark and went east and then came back to the Fertile Crescent. So I am fascinated by the distribution of where the data is. Now we'll change gears and we'll get into writing itself. We end up coming back to the Middle East because this Indus Valley script ended up dying out, and then the area where Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt become the primary origin for script that is phonetic. So we can zoom in here to Egypt. We have the Serabet al-Qadim script in Sinai, so it's called Proto-Sinaitic. And then we have this Wadi el-Hol script. It is in the deeper part of Egypt. These are the oldest two examples of the alphabet. They are fascinatingly located in the same area that the Israelites came from and went to, because Abraham was over here in the city of Ur in Mesopotamia. He lived around the area of Terah for a while and then settled down into present-day Israel, and then his descendants ended up going into Egypt. So I find this form rather interesting. The oldest Hebrew that we've found is right here, a piece of pottery in Israel that's called the Jerubbaal inscription, 1100 BC. So that's getting us past the time of David and into the time of the Judges. The Phoenician script was going around 1050 BC, and we can see a few examples here of the evolution of language as they are now increasing. When we get down into 925 BC, we see the Gezer calendar. It is in the Phoenician or Hebrew script because it's very hard to distinguish Phoenician, Hebrew, and Sinaitic. They're almost exactly the same. So we'll zoom out just a bit and we can start seeing the evolution of the spread of language. This ancient South Arabian script is starting to be developed there about 900 BC. But remember, this is about the same time as all these other scripts are coming up. This Arabian script is very closely associated with the Aramaic script. And remember, that is from Aram, the son of Shem, from this area that we call Syria currently. As we move along, we see more and more examples, like the Ahiram sarcophagus in 850 BC. It has the Phoenician alphabet on it. And interesting, when we start spreading out, remember there are Shem, Ham, and Japheth on the planet. So we first start seeing our bilingual scripts here, like this Karatepe bilingual inscription from the 700s BC. In order to successfully trade, civilizations start realizing they need to have these bilingual scripts so they can internationally communicate, the Japhethitic peoples and the Shemitic and Hamitic peoples. So that is up there in Turkey, close to Tarsus. It would be an international trade route. Eshmanazar sarcophagus has more examples of writing on it. And then we start seeing this Aramaic spread over to Persia. So we get the Old Persian, the Histon inscription in 525 BC. And remember, this is the time where the temple has been destroyed and the Jews have been dispersed. Aramaic starts to spread down here in Arabia and now competing with the Arabic script. And we'll zoom out just a little bit more. See the bigger picture of how the script is going to spread now into Iran and then to the east. A more updated version of Aramaic is now called Syriac, that starts spreading into Iran and to the east. So it's very important to understand the relationship of all this and the spread of language. We can see the core right here with Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Egypt. So now let's zoom out even a little bit more and we'll go to China. We have to take these areas one at a time, so remember that all those scripts developing in the Middle East are going from oldest to youngest as I've listed them. And now we'll go to Asia and we'll explore how the languages going east from the Middle East into Asia start colliding with the scripts that are being developed over in Asia. The oldest examples of the Chinese writing are on the Oracle bone script, and that is somewhere around 1200 BC. We also have bronze inscriptions that could be from 1600 to 1046 BC, but most likely more in the 1046 BC area. So this Oracle bone script is just a little bit older, 1200 BC, than the Jerubbaal pottery inscription from 1100 BC, and that Jerubbaal is the one named Gideon. So the Chinese script starts to spread out in greater popularity, localized to this East Asian area, which is very fertile, what we think of as China. But you can see now that the scripts are on collision course with each other. And here is another one of the collisions that happens. Just so we know what this red arrow is also, is we have this other collision that starts happening over here in the area of Kazakhstan. And that's because the Shemitic languages are spreading out here to the east, but Alexander the Great has his conquest in 330 BC, which spreads the Greek culture and the Greek script over here all the way into India. So it's after about 300 BC that we start seeing a huge increase in the scripts of India, one of the originals being the Kharosthi script, 300 BC. It's a little north of India, what we think of as Pakistan or Afghanistan, where this Kharosthi script is. But because of this collision with the Shemitic and Greek languages, now we need our bilingual inscription here in India as well. So here I've put in more of the Indian scripts on here that are compressing into this area of North India. We start seeing Brahmi script developed in 232 BC with the Edicts of Ashoka. Sanskrit is talked about quite a bit nowadays. Sanskrit was a language prior to this, oral tradition passed on the Indian heritage, and then we start seeing oldest Sanskrit writing, the actual writing versus the language, with the Gosandi inscription around 200s to 100s BC. The Rig Veda itself was written in the 3rd century BC, like in the 200s BC. So it changed from oral tradition to now written tradition, getting into the Sanskrit. Now I'm going to change the color of the arrow because we have such a mix of the Greek and the Shemitic cultures here in India that this Brahmi script starts shooting off a lot of technological changes in different directions and has heavy influence in Southeast Asia and all across India as well. And it starts having a little bit of influence out here, even into the islands in the Pacific, Polynesia, the Malay Peninsula, Philippines, that area. So Tamil is developed in the south part of India in the 200s BC. Then we have the Heliodorus pillar in 113 BC, and that is also a bilingual. So we see that as cultures are developing, they recognize the need to put these bilinguals in there so they can transfer their information internationally, because we have that Greek and Aramaic collision up here in India. So now we see the bilingual not just here in Turkey, but now we have the bilingual over here in India. And it has the Brahmi script on it and the Greek. Sogdian script is then an Indian invention based upon all this mixing of languages and cultures, and it starts going up into the north and into the east. Hinduism has been developed from ancient times in India, and then Buddhism starts to be developed, I think around 600 BC. You have these various Brahmi scripts that start carrying Buddhism across the Nepalese plateau and out east towards China. So Buddhism becomes very big when it collides with the Chinese culture. The Brahmi script comes down here from northern India down into the west part of India, and we start seeing the Nagari script 100 AD, Devanagari script also. The Devanagari script is what is used to write the Bhagavad Gita in 100 AD. So now we'll shift our focus just a little bit more to the east because Japan starts to come in play. Chinese culture, plus a little bit of this Indian culture from the languages coming up over the north, starts to combine in Japan, and Japan comes up with its own script called kanji in the 400s AD. So there is Japanese kanji. And then in 600s AD, we go back to India and we have the Siddham script. And this is coming up through the north, going across Pakistan, Afghanistan, up into Kazakhstan, and then going across the Silk Road. And this Indian version, the Brahmi scripts that are coming from India start to play a more important role going across Asia in the very north because of the competition with China here in the very east. So this hybridized Greek and Shemitic language now starts to become the basis for even the Khmer script in 611 AD. And then, interestingly, we start seeing Southeast Asia, down here where Thailand is developing. So we have the Cambodian Khmer script, 611. So this is another place where the cultures are colliding. China is able to get its culture down here, but India is also easily able to transfer its culture into the Southeast Asia. And remember Attila the Hun, we don't just have a feedback loop from Greece and Alexander the Great going over here into northern India and into the steppe area of Asia, but we have the peoples of this great kingdom in the steppe area of Asia going back to the east. So we start seeing Hungarian script, so that these Indian languages are feeding back into Europe. And you see a lot of the influence of the nomadic people of the steppes having great conquests into Europe, and a lot of those Eastern European nations are a result of this feedback loop with the conquests of the nomadic people of the steppes. In 1000 AD, we start seeing more scripts in Nepal, which is also very hard to get to because of the Himalayan mountain ranges. So that's Prakhalit Nepal script. And we see Byakutsky script. It's over here in between Southeast Asia, Thailand area, and India. One of the effects that I think is fun about the periodic table of history is just seeing how places develop because of migrations. Civilization groups really like a certain area, but then after time they migrate, and then they start going back and forth, and then halfway between the points where they're migrating to, culture starts developed, almost because of the distance involved in the journey. A lot of the people that thought they could travel 3,000 miles decide they don't really want to do that. They want to travel 1,500 miles instead, and they'll just stay there. So we see the Byakutsky script in the 1000s AD. And now this Southeast Asia peninsula by Thailand starts to get more populated with Vietnam and Burma. And they have the Indian influence that has been influenced by Greek, influenced by Aramaic, and influenced by Chinese. So we see the Chu Nom script in 1100 AD. And the Babayan script starts going over here into the Philippine Islands. Now let's change our focus. Zoom out just a little bit. Mongolian script starts about 1204 AD. And this was one of the most successful kingdoms in the history of the world. They had conquered all of China down into India, across the nomadic steppes down here into the Middle East, and even over here into Europe. The later Mughal Empire of India is actually an offshoot of the Mongolian conquest, because Mughal means Mongol. The Mongolian script stretches a little bit more to the east, but now we have all these competing forces because of Japanese and the Chinese and all these Indian languages that have already gone across Asia. So in 1269, Mandarin is developed, and we have a lot of these other languages in Chinese called Min and Wu, Yui and Jin. And so the Chinese people stay here kind of in an island culture with all of this other activity just sweeping around them. And because the Chinese land is so rich, the people can thrive there with a lot of resources. Well, now Thai script comes out in 1283. Korean script, Hangul script, starts in 1443 AD. Laos comes online with writing with the Teo Noi script in 1497 AD. And the last Asian script I'll talk about is the Gujarati script, 1592, right here in the west part of India, and that is still being used today. So now we've gone through the Middle East and Asia, and you can look at these arrows on how written language has spread out, and you can see how logical it would be. Now let's add another layer of complexity to this. Let's come in here to Africa, and we'll start talking about the scripts in Africa. And remember, this area is where the alphabetic language itself developed. And we think about our oldest alphabet here, it keeps on developing. And so we have hieroglyphics becoming hieratic script. And that's around 1550 where it's fully developed, 1550 BC. And zoom out a little bit, because we know that our cradle of writing is right here. So we have the influence of these original writing systems going up here in Israel like we knew before. And Egypt starts doubling up on its technology for writing. We fast forward through all of this Shemitic mixing of language, and then we have in Egypt the Demotic script in 650 BC. And because of trade in the Mediterranean, Egyptian language that is part Phoenician also spreads across North Africa. And we start seeing what's called Tiffany in 600 BC. And that goes all the way to Morocco. In Nigeria, the Nasibidi script is developed in 400 BC. And that script developed way farther to the west by Central Africa on the Atlantic coast. We also have this, at this time, the different scripts are going back and forth, competing up and down the Nile River. And we have a Cushitic Meroitic script in 300 BC. So now that's getting close to Ethiopia. Arabian script starts crossing over into Ethiopia as well, so we have a few competitive forces, but remember, they've kind of mixed with each other already. But we have the Ge'ez script in 100 AD, and remember, this is after the time of Jesus, so now we have the Ethiopic Genesis being written in Ge'ez script. And now it's feeding back up into Egypt. So we have a secondary rival kingdom to Egypt. And this is the same time when the missionaries, the original 12 apostles, have now gone out into the world. Remember, some of the apostles have been killed by this time, but you still have John that may be alive at the time where this Ge'ez script is being developed, which is after Simon the Zealot has been down here. Demotic script is upgraded into Coptic script in 300 AD, and now a lot of religious writings are transcribed in Coptic. So the Ethiopians start to push into Africa a bit. And then we have South Sudanese, Old Nubian in 600 AD. And what happens here also, we also have the rise of Islam. So before this conquest, you would see a lot of Phoenician scripts going across the Mediterranean. Now you have this yellow arrow going across northern Africa, which is the Arabian script. The Arabic script also comes down here into Somalia. Over in West Africa, we have another script starts to pop up in 1450 AD. It's called Adinkra. And these pictographs have meaning and they are sewn into clothes. Now then we have Lusona in the 1600s AD. And now the Latin alphabet starts to come down. So I'm going to just put that in here and have a few pins show that the Latin alphabet is going across this green part of Africa. It's having a hard time penetrating the Middle East area in North Africa because of the Islamic conquest. But now we see the European nations start to put the Latin alphabet into Africa by way of exploration and coming down here across the west side of Africa along the Atlantic coast. And remember, that's going to be around the 1600s. Latin starts to dominate in this green region all the way to the south. There were a couple other tries at script. We have Vai script, and that happens in the 1830s in West Africa. And then we have Barama script over by Somalia, 1933, and a new script, Luo script by Kenya in 2009. To make all of this understanding complete, then we will go out to Europe. We back up in time once again and remember that we have our ancient hieroglyphs here on the island of Crete. So Europe also starts experimenting with alphabets in the 1800s BC. We have linear A, and here is an example of this. This linear A develops into Mycenaean Greek in 1400 BC and starts to spread into mainland Greece. This whole time we know that trading is going on in the Mediterranean, so the Phoenician languages are spinning around this Mediterranean, encountering this Mycenaean Greek, and then the Greek alphabet is formed in 800 BC. And something the Greeks did was to create vowels, where we get the alpha and omega and omicron from. So now we're at 800 BC. We find the Dipelian inscription in 740 BC and Nestor's cup in somewhere between 770 to 750 BC. Now Greece starts to influence Rome. And we have the Duenos inscription in 600 BC in Latin. So this is one of the earliest scripts we have in Latin. The Boeotian alphabet starts 450 to 425 BC. And now we start seeing a competitor. Very interestingly, we zoom out. So we can get this Danish alphabet. It's called the rune script. So now, unbeknownst to these other cultures, you have a new culture that's starting to write down its history up here, 150 AD in Northern Europe. I sometimes wonder if the ice is melting back enough and people are just spreading as the ice is melting back. So this Denmark script starts spreading into Germany. And then we see some missionary work. There's a Gothic Bible in southern Germany. It's called the Codex Argentus. It was written by the missionary Ulfilas from 340 to 383 AD. So now this Danish influence starts spreading out, and we get the Anglo-Frisian in 400 and Old English in 450. So St. Patrick would have started leaving his mark, so now we have the Gaelic script come up. The Gospel of Mark is written down in the 600s AD. Beowulf happens around 700 AD, so we can see this secondary culture forming up here in the north, separate from Greek and separate from Italy. Now remember, we talked about the central nomadic steppes, the influence of many multiple conquests coming out from Kazakhstan area, North Pakistan, Afghanistan, coming across the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, across Ukraine and into Eastern Europe. Well, we see the Old Hungarian script in 720 AD developed from that. And remember, that is that hybrid language from Greece and India, that Indo-Aryan. So we have the example of Old Hungarian in 720 AD. Old High German, 750 AD. And Italy starts to make its mark on Europe because it's spreading its alphabet, the Latin alphabet, all across Europe now. So we have the Oaths of Strasbourg in France. This starts to influence England as well. Remember, the Nordic conquests come up later. And a lot of this mixing from French and French culture goes into England, combines with these Danish, German languages. In Spain, we have the Cartularies of Valpuesta in the 800s AD. Cyrillic script of Ukraine and Russia is developed in 893 AD. And so we have here the Lord's Prayer in Cyrillic. Cyrillic does pretty well in its expansion. I'm going to zoom out. Perhaps the ice is melting back a little over here again, so now that gives the Russians a shot to spread this Cyrillic language. And that goes all the way to the Pacific. Let me normalize this again, and we have the Scottish. In Scotland, we have the Gaelic Psalter, 1025 AD. And that is a songbook. In Spain, we have the Cantar del Mio Cid, 1200 AD. And in Norway, we have the Homily Book, 1200 AD. Swedish script, 1225. There's the Law of Vaskatalagan, 1280 AD. In 1300, we have the Pergamino Charar in Portugal. That is one of the oldest Portuguese documents we have. And now we have a really good picture, and it still goes very interestingly. Christopher Columbus crosses the Atlantic, and now we have this Latin influence through Spain going into Central America. Isn't that incredible? And just as an aside, when we go over here into the Americas, let's look at some cultures down here. We have 3 places to note. We have the Quipi Inca knot system. That was a knot system where each strand of the knot, different colors or the different ways the Incas wove together the colors in the string would communicate information. So that is kind of a proprietary, interesting system. Over here with the Toltecs, we have the Cascajal block, 1000 BC, and the Mayaglyphs of the Dresden Code, 300 BC. So those are 3 places to note, and this is what they look like. Maybe it's information on how to cut somebody's heart out, I'm not sure. So let's go just a little bit further and we can finish off the whole study. England starts to spread the Latin script to write down English into the North Americas, and then Portugal starts spreading Portuguese with Latin script into Brazil. And now look at what happens here in Africa. You have all this spread of Latin across Africa because of the exploration of the Danes, the Portuguese, the French, the English. And so you start seeing this Latin script spread all across here, which I was always wondering why I couldn't find more books on Africa, original books from Africa. Well, it's because they just aren't there. This spread keeps on going up. We can see the The Portuguese, French, and also English did a lot of exploration in this area. The English came up in here. Latin spread across the Malay Peninsula and into Australia through English and then into New Zealand. And that covers the whole world. Isn't that incredible? So now I'm going to go back over into the whole world. We can just look at the picture and the understanding that we just got about the expansion of writing. Normalize that and then zoom in just a little bit. Yeah, right here we know this is the cradle of writing. And then look at those arrows as they spread out, the yellow arrows. Greek combining, it's a big deal. Arabic coming here into Africa. Really big deal right here, this mix between the Greek culture and the Indian culture. And then you can see this mixing over here, Indian culture trying to get into China, not making it. But then the Italian script is coming in here. And now because of the trading that has happened between the United States and China, a new system of pinyin has been developed. So there can be a translation between the simplified Chinese and the Latin script. And doesn't it answer a lot of questions? I mean, when I did this study, I can't tell you how many questions I had answered. Places where cultures were developing and just watching them, how everyone is trying to trade goods and make money, how there's all these interconnections as population is increasing and as knowledge is increasing. Just downright fascinating. Well, what are your thoughts on that? Be sure to leave them there in the comments section. If anything struck you in your mind as you were looking at this influence of language expanding across the world, just write that in the comment section. I would be really curious about that. I know I have thousands of thoughts just looking at this even now. Israel being right in the center of the writing universe is interesting. This is really interesting in India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, where Greek is combining with the Indian languages. It's really interesting down here in Ethiopia, where Arabic is coming across. And I find it interesting up here how the Latin language spread. Well, I am excited. This was really fun to figure all this out. I'm excited for you, and I am happy for the things I learned. I truly hope the best for you. Hope you have a good week, and I'll see you in the next video.